Hey, it's me, it's Tom. Thought I'd film this little video to give a general update on the channel here. Off the top, I'll let you know that I'm working on a few more comics. One is a second Remo comic, one is for another character called Genie, and also I'm gonna do a commentary track, I guess, for First Day Back on Earth. I've got the issue up in front of me and I'm gonna talk about it. This is the cover, which is taken from a later page that you actually see happen in the comic. I just really like this image, I think it's very striking. Immediately, it sort of tells you, okay, here's a guy in a cape, probably a superhero, here's a big robot. That's pretty much the crux of what's happening in the comic. Yeah, I took this after I'd already made the full page that this is from. I had to edit it back so it was a complete image, and that the Intimidator had a second gun on its shoulder, because in the actual comic that gun has been torn off at this point. There you go. The little line on the logo it's vaguely inspired by the logo I used to have for this character when I drew him as a child, when he was called Super Remo, and all the letters on that had lots of little links and flowy lines. All the letters were connected. But yeah, ditched most of that, but just kept a little underline of the R, because I think that looks quite good. It's pretty solid, it's simple, and there it is again on the first page. This page, actually, I never intended to be actually in the comic. I made this more as like a mock-up of how it would start, but then it just sort of, I started doing the rest of it and it sort of ended up just being the first page. It looks a lot lesser in quality than a lot of the rest of the comic because, you know, all the lines are very sort of jaggy, and obviously the buildings down there at the bottom are pretty minimalistic, let's call it. And yeah, I thought it would be interesting to frame this comic not from Matthew's point of view, but from Loretta's point of view. Originally, the opening text was different. It was going to be sort of what her report to the police, but framed as the narrative for this issue. But I changed that later on. It seemed like this felt better, and you'd get a clearer idea of the character and Loretta's relationship to him. So yeah, this opening monologue has been changed a few times. In fact, originally the next page was going to be the first page. This page here was originally going to be how it would start, and that would be the first thing you saw. And the reason I changed it was because here you see Matthew, and he is beaten, he is downtrodden, he is not heroic. So I wanted the first thing you saw of him to be quite heroic. Hence, in the first page, you see him punching the Intimidator robot, and on the front cover, you see him standing up to it. So you get that, you know, he's a heroic figure, whereas here, he is at his wit's end, he's been through hell, he's a broken man, basically, in this panel. You get a best look at the costume here as well. Originally, the costume was just a plain, flat green. It didn't look visually striking enough, which is why I added those sort of lines in it, to sort of make it look a bit less like a big jumper and more like what it's supposed to be, which is alien-crafted body armor. Also have Loretta's reaction to what's going on down the side. Wanted to show her grabbing the bat so you could see that she's a bit prepared for whatever's happening, because he's not turning up at the front door here, he's turning up on the balcony. It just seemed that's naturally what, if you could fly, if you knew that the person you're going to see had a balcony, you'd go and knock on that door. So yeah, but of course, because he's knocking on the balcony door, that strikes Loretta's paranoia, which is why she gets the bat. And the bat is also important because it'll demonstrate another of his powers a few pages down the line. And here, this page 3 is one of my least favourites because it's just a lot of talking, and it's basically just the exposition page. When I did it for the pencils, it actually didn't have the building in the background. That was just its own separate panel up at the top. I chose to put it in the background here just so it could be a little more visually interesting. One thing that I really do like about this page is the posters in the background in Loretta's office. Loretta's office looks far too big in this panel, but making the false posters for films that Matthew has been in before he got abducted was one of the best things. And I'll tell you what they are now. The first one is called Swords at Dawn 2, a Lord of the Rings fantasy-esque type movie. The next one says Casino Heist, which is basically Ocean's 11, but he's in it. And the third one is Bad Cops, which is sort of a buddy comedy that he was in. Adding those to the room definitely needed something other than just walls. I feel like the posters just reinforce, okay, this guy's an actor, he's been in some films. That's all of that. And here we see sort of Matthew's personality come in very strongly. Well, I'll get to that in the next page. In Loretta's little narration boxes, they're coloured blue. Blue represents Loretta and green represents Matthew because he's wearing the green costume. And here she's wearing a blue blazer. And that's sort of, I tried to stick with that through the whole thing. But as we see here, Matthew is changed and he's now wearing blue pyjamas with LJ stitched on them. I thought it would be nice to show that he's gotten out of the costume and Loretta has lent him what clothes she had available for him to be in while they had this conversation. And to sort of show that enough time has passed, that despite the argument they're having in this flashback at the top, she's not still mad at him. Enough time has passed for that to be water under the bridge, and she's just sort of surprised but also relieved to have him back. And here we see the bat again, which he just obliterates with his laser vision. So yeah, there's another reason why I had Loretta pick up the bat in the first place, because it was just something that could be on the table while they're talking that Matthew could demonstrate his powers with. It was originally going to be a mug. I don't know, it just seemed better. It seemed like the point of this is you see a lot of things where something, you know, supernatural or unreal happens to someone and they try and explain it to their friend or their partner or whoever and they just don't believe it. Matthew Remtol, none of that. He's just going to show you straight out the bat, no pun intended, I have powers, so hopefully now everything I'm about to tell you will be more believable because you've just seen with your own eyes what I can do with my eyes. Because then he brings up the fact that he was abducted by aliens, which is a very unbelievable story. Unless you've just seen a man shoot lasers out of his face, then you can sort of maybe believe what he's saying. When I drew I had little red dots in his eyes because I thought it would be cool to show the sort of the lasers cooling down, and like I really like the way the steam coming off them here because I just like the way it looks. It reinforces like this is a pretty powerful force of energy that he's emitting from himself. And here we get to the abduction. In my head, they're arguing about a premiere of a movie that Matthew's in, but in my head Matthew never actually attended the premiere. He just went straight to get some alcohol and go for a pity walk up on the moor. Another thing that I've put in just to hammer home that at this point in the flashback, Matthew is not the most attentive or selfless or good person. And here he is having a pity party for himself, having a go at himself for being oblivious, not noticing that he's being abducted by a spaceship at that very moment. And this is one of my favourite pages. I absolutely love this page. I actually drew this scenario years ago just in a notebook in his original origin where he was kidnapped by aliens to a gate-crashing a Comic-Con. What stuck from that is this is the worst hangover I've ever had. Well, second worst, which shows this is a man who deals with extreme situations by covering up pain or panic that he's feeling with jokes and quips. This is a quippy character. He's not going to address things, he's going to make a joke about it. And here we see they're doing something to him. Again, it's unclear what exactly is being done to him, it's just experiments, and it's deliberately open for interpretation. And here also we see our first look at the Jikin, the war race that take him in the first place. There's actually a method behind the colour of the cloaks that they're wearing. This guy you see up top, he has blue trim on his cloak, which marks him out as a science officer. He's sort of in charge of doing the experiments and making all of the things work. And here we see our first look at Emperor Zarkell, the guy behind all of this, who has bands or braces on his horns. Because yeah, I wanted something to signify this is the guy in charge. Based on the design of these creatures, a crown just wouldn't have fit, but I like having the silver bands on the horns. That means you're emperor. You're the emperor, buddy. And also his cloak, you can't quite see it, you can just see a tiny speck of it. His cloak has a gold trim as opposed to a blue one, which marks him out as royal. And here we see Zarkell's arena. That symbol is just originally just what I drew on the spaceship, but I decided to make that Zarkell's symbol, which is actually the Jikin symbol for the letter T. I have a whole alphabet with characters like these to represent the alphabet of this alien race. But yeah, this symbol on the flag that you see in the arena, that is the letter T, because Zarkell begins with T, and he is an egomaniac, basically. That's the thought process behind that. Here we see an effect that I use a bit in this comic, where we see Matthew Remtol up front, having a flashback happen behind him. It might not be as clear on the computer screens, but in all of the flashbacks that are happening behind him, the outline of things is done in a dark grey instead of black, whereas Matthew here, his outline is all in black to sort of give the impression of this is a faded past, this has all happened previously. And here we see our first look at why he's called Remo. The real universe reason behind that is it's just a word I came up with when I was a kid. He was called Super Remo just because, I don't know, it sounded good in my head. Maybe I subconsciously stole it from a percussion company, but who knows? It stuck as his name. But I thought, if that was just an alien term for, like, champion or fighter, and that's what they call him when they get him in this arena, that works. And the fact that he still refers to himself as Remo is sort of indicative that his time in this arena has left psychological damage and sort of an identity conflict, because he still views himself somewhat as Arkell's champion, as this fighter, this person who is forced to just fight every day in this arena again and again, and that still remains deep set within him, and it's hard for him to let go of the identity that they ingrained into him while he was being kept there. What else is happening here? We see more of Arkell here in his purple and gold costume. Above him is Vincent, and that creature behind him is actually a Plutonian. I do have some Plutonian characters from a different title that maybe you'll see more of later on this channel, but for now I'm just going to talk about Vincent. His character came in originally as someone who saved Remo from the experiments that the Jikin were doing to him before they could put him under mind control, and in the process he would die, which would inspire Matthew to take on a more heroic role in his own life. In this issue, which is the canonical version, I've made it a sort of deeper connection between them, because originally it was just they knew each other for a very short amount of time. Vincent gave his life and Matthew became heroic. It seemed all happening too fast, which is why in this one I've sort of made it so they become friends in the arena and they have quite a close relationship, and Vincent and Matthew escape together. And Vincent's real name is V1 Sentu. Vincent is a nickname that Matthew calls him affectionately, which is a shortened, more Earth-like version of his original name. Also on Arkell's chair, that little silk is sort of supposed to be reminiscent of spiderweb, just to give an even more sinister air to it. This is a bad guy, this is a villain right here, sitting in this chair with his silver bands. And here we see Matthew and Vincent escaping together. Their escape summed up in the line, "It wasn't entirely successful." There's more of those little ships, the same ones that abducted Matthew in the first place. I've drawn Matthew with a beard in all of these flashbacks as well, just to show quite a lot of time has passed. There's another smaller vehicle going down there after them. Here we get them stealing the ship to go back to their own respective planets, and there they go, going to Earth, losing fuel, and this is where Vincent tragically loses his life. The fact that Vincent sacrifices so much to get Matthew back home, that really does resonate with Matthew there, because here it's not just he's losing someone who saved his life, he's losing a close friend here. And if only that ship had had enough fuel, Vincent would have been able to go home to his own family, and so there's that guilt that sticks with Matthew throughout after this event happens. And yeah, I think a deeper, closer, more personal connection between Matthew and Vincent was important behind Matthew's motivations, because this is a big part of why he chooses to still be a hero. And that's the end of the flashback. Here's just a quiet moment between Matthew and Loretta as she lets it all sink in. If you look at the clock, you can see that minutes are passing as this exchange happens. It's taking a bit for this to sink in. Here we have, it's kind of another joke, or I guess more of a subversion, because we get what now, and immediately what we see is Matthew holding a box of donuts and a cup of coffee. See, in the comics that I used to draw as a kid, donuts were always Matthew's favourite food. He'd always be eating donuts. He might stop in the middle of a fight just to go and get some if he saw some nearby. But yeah, Matthew's a big fan of donuts and coffee, and also here, he is wearing the same blazer that Loretta was wearing in page 3. Logistically, the only clothes he would have access to are hers, but also it sort of represents her acceptance of him. This page is sort of comedy and tragedy meeting in the middle. There's what now, and then we see donuts and coffee, but then we pull back and reveal that this is at the graves of Matthew's parents, who in canon died whilst Matthew was off-world in the arena, so he missed both of their deaths, both of their funerals, and he wasn't on that good of terms with them before he was abducted. But then also, he's been presumed dead, so of course his own grave would also be there. And maybe this is a bit far, but on his parents' grave it says loving husband and father of 2, and loving wife and mother of 2, but on Matthew's grave it just says son and brother. My interpretation of that is more, that's sort of how he views his grave. It might not be as literal as it is there. But yeah, the awkwardness of standing by your own grave whilst you were clearly very much alive is something that I like gets across here. And also, it seemed like a very simple way to reveal that Matthew has a brother who will pop up in later comics. I thought about having him in this one, but it just seemed like it would get too crowded with the origin story and the fight and all of the other stuff. There wasn't really any room for his brother to show up, but he does have one, so you see that there. Again, Matthew outlined in black with flashbacks outlined in lead. All the things he's gone through in the arena. Getting crushed in a claw, fighting big monsters, seeing other beings get murdered, and just being forced to use his powers against his will. The things that he's saying here are sort of supposed to be excuses he's used in the past when he was still an actor and he was choosing to go to big parties instead of spending time with family. Here they have a different connotation because, again, he's covering up for the pain he's felt. Matthew and Loretta start talking, and she mentions you should start getting your old life back, and then he says that that's not what he wants. He doesn't want his old life back, basically. All that he's been through, losing Vincent, figuring out his parents are dead, because that is the first time he's hearing of it. In the previous page, when Loretta says, "What now?" his instinct is to go to his family, but he doesn't know that they've died whilst he's been off-world. And so, in the space of a day, he's lost his close friend Vincent, who helped him escape, who gave his life to save his, and he's realised that both his mother and his father have died in his absence. So he's got a lot of grief going on here, and he realises the sort of error of his past ways, and that before he was taken, he was not the best person, and this is a big driving force behind him, the need to be better than he was. A mix of wanting to make up for his past mistakes, and also what the Jikin have drilled into him. He has to be a better fighter, and that instinct is going to kick in right in the next page. We see a girl running in terror here, and here we see our first look at the Intimidator, just dashing all hopes of getting back to normality here. One of the probably the weaker parts of this issue is who the Intimidator is and why they're doing what they're doing. I should say who's controlling the Intimidator. But the reason that I've chose to have the Intimidator as the villain that Matthew fights in this issue is the first time that I ever drew this character, the first thing I remember ever doing with him. He fought a big robot in the city, and that's what I remember. I've lost that issue. That's beyond lost at this point. He was actually, he had no hair in that issue. He was bald because one of the inspirations behind me starting drawing these comics was the Captain Underpants book series, of all things, because George and Harold in those would always make their own comics and sell them on the playground. Captain Underpants was bald, so I made Super Remo bald, but that was dashed immediately in the next time I drew him. He had spiky hair, which is kind of stuck here. But yeah, so basically the first time I ever drew this character, he was fighting a big robot, and that's why I've chosen to have the Intimidator be the villain in this. I don't know if I could call it a callback, it's more, but it's a personal callback, it's sort of just for me. It felt right to do. And there is more behind the character of the Intimidator. I tried to get across as much as I could in this, but there is more to it than just a big robot that's destroying a city. And in my head, what's happening here is, this isn't necessarily a plan, but it's a weapons test. And the weapon being tested is the Intimidator suit. The person behind it does have a thing for destiny and fate, which I tried to get across as much as I could in the speech, and also to get across that it's not just a pre-programmed robot, there is a thought to it. It understands what's going on. These aren't pre-recorded phrases that it has. And that's why I have it say here, hiding will not save you, because clearly the person controlling the Intimidator has seen Loretta go hide behind the bus, so it's saying, hiding won't save you. Another thing that I want to do with this page is show Matthew disappears immediately to give a hint of his speed. I did originally have him say what his powers were in the flashback, but I decided you didn't need to have a list of what they are because you see them all in action in the issue anyway. But yeah, Matthew disappears immediately, and that's to give a bit of a glimpse into the fact that he is kind of fast when he wants to be, because in just the time it takes for this page to happen, he has gone back to Loretta's apartment, he has gotten into his costume, and he has come back here. So there we see the instinct to fight arise within. They see this big robot and immediately he's like, I have to go and get my costume and come back and fight this. And Loretta has a more reasonable reaction, which is telling him off, essentially. Off screen on the previous page, clearly Matthew has punched the Intimidator and knocked it over. And you can actually see its feet down there, lying dazed from the initial blow. But it gets right back up his feet and makes a real fool out of Matthew in the top 3 panels here. One of the things that took longest about drawing this was the clothes rails and making the clothing shop that he gets thrown into look detailed enough, because because drawing all of these individual clothes and giving them, you know, slightly different colours and trying to make the place look occupied took a long time. And then here's another quip. Again, this character will deal with pain through humour, that's who he is, and then right back into the action. Not too sure about this page. I've always been a bit unsure about the positioning of the panels on it, but of course up top you've got the standoff between the laser vision and the miniguns. This laser line that's going across the back of the Intimidator was a nightmare to remember for continuity throughout the rest of the issue, but I think that I did it. But yeah, this basically shows that Matthew knows that his best chance of attacking this thing is to get behind it and take its weapons out that way. I hope that this also represents that the bullets are not having much of an effect on him. They hurt, but they're not doing any lasting damage. It's actually the suit, not him, that's repelling them, because it's made of alien material. But there, that's what that panel up there is about. This big panel in the background, I did find it difficult to just get that in the right place, and I'm still a bit unsure about it. He tears off one of the guns, feeling cocky about it, and then the shoulder panel has a feature that can just throw him across a building. There he goes. And actually, this page was completely different when I drew it in pencil. Instead of any of this happening, you saw an old man running away from the Intimidator, and he'd fall down next to a hot dog cart, and then you'd see Matthew pick him up and put him on a building for safety. And that was basically because I wanted to show Matthew doing something heroic. But yeah, I chose to swap it out when I actually came to draw it for real. A little quite reflective moment for Matthew himself. Then we get a flashback to the moment that Vincent actually died, and we see Vincent's dying words, because I felt it was important to remind the audience that this happened just very recently, and then what Vincent says, "You don't have to fight anymore," is a very important line, because immediately after that we see the Intimidator saying the same thing but in a different context and bringing back the Destiny theme, and here we see the cover image as it is originally, and there's the missing gun, which I had to fix for the cover. In the pencil drawings, what he's saying here is, because he's just saved a man from getting crushed next to a hot dog cart, he's saying, "Now you've made it personal, I used to love those hot dogs." But I changed that for a more sort of bold, standing up to the enemy kind of situation here. Felt it fit better, and it was more in tune with the changes that I made to the previous page. Big writing, "I'm not done fighting yet," which is important because that shows that this character will fight to the end if he has to. This is probably one of my favourite pages, for the image of him standing up to the big robot, the way that these panels are all laid out in front of it, and that you see the Intimidator let off some new tricks. And this bit at the bottom shows that Matthew's reflexes are fast enough that he has time for a little quip before grabbing onto a missile. And then we get this panel, which is another panel I really like, because he eliminates the threat immediately, and then we get a very cliche, well, that could have gone worse, and then it gets worse. But this is also our reveal that the Intimidator can fly up there at the top. I think maybe if I could go back I would make this little bit happen across several pages and make the panels bigger, but I feel like it works well enough. We see him and the Intimidator. I think this is the only time we see the full body of the Intimidator, and it does have the scar from the laser vision that it got earlier. Matthew in this panel up at the top where he's between the other three in the middle. I probably drew him a little bit too big, but I feel like it gets the point across. He is flying towards the arm of the Intimidator and tearing it off to slap it in its head. This panel at the bottom is also kind of a reference to that classic image of Batman slapping Robin. That's at least what I used as a visual guide for what's happening here. And then just the smile in its own small panel to show he is fully confident that he has won this now. Get rid of the legs, get rid of the rocket boosts, and then the Intimidator begins to fall. And you can see in the top corner there his arms coming down, because he knows if that lands in the city that's going to cause collateral damage, which is why he swoops down here and holds it up and just gently lowers it. What this also does is show a bit of how strong he is, that he is able to lift that huge robot and carry it down with only a bit of strain. Like maybe if you or I were lifting a heavy box, that's about the same amount of strain he's putting in here, whereas that will probably crush a normal person. And then his sort of cocky monologue that he gives to the fallen Intimidator, and at this point he's figured out that it probably has a pilot, which is why he's saying, "Let's find out who you are." It's a bit Scooby-Doo in a way. Originally the Intimidator didn't say anything here in the bottom, but I decided I'd add these speech bubbles just to make it clear that this is being piloted remotely and voiced by someone remotely, because originally he just opened it and there's no one there and he's like, oh. But I put in the speech bubbles just to make it clear there is someone else behind what's happened here today. And this is where you can see Intimidator Mark 1 written next to the speaker, so there's a little hint that maybe there's more going on to this than we originally would assume assume. I also really like this page because suddenly all he's been thinking about is the fight up until now, but suddenly he's been confronted with the spectators who have seen him take this thing out. And immediately what it reminds him of is taking down one of the aliens in Zarkell's arena, which is what this flashback here does, with the comments from the audience pouring over it, sort of to show that he is hearing these comments, but they're not really registering with him. His mind is elsewhere. That's there to also show that the fighting instincts that were drilled into him in the arena haven't quite left, and he's brought a part of this whole experience that he's had back to Earth with him. And then we see on its own him getting recognised as the actor that he was before he was abducted by aliens. And then he realises he needs to make a statement here, he needs to explain what's going on, and then we get him talking to the camera and doing his little heroic monologue. But of course we see this is on the news, and the person watching the news is the person who's controlling the Intimidator. The person behind the Intimidator has seen all this happen, and now he knows that the person who's taken down his creation is Remo. And I do like the final page on this where his name comes up and it's the logo. It shows that the word Remo has become drilled into him as part of his own identity. The fact he's using the name that his captors gave him, I think gives a little bit of insight into the fact that maybe he's not thinking this through, and Loretta calls him out on that in the next page. And then we get her closing monologue to bookend this whole thing. Like I say, originally this was going to be part of her police report on the situation, how she was explaining her relationship to Matthew, but I do prefer it as a direct address to the audience where we see her genuine, honest thoughts on what is happening here. And then we get another cutaway to the controller of the Intimidator who's turning off his television, and he says that here. He's a fast person. He's not like the Flash fast. He doesn't have super speed, I wouldn't say, but he's certainly faster than a regular human being. The way I would say is whilst running, he could probably keep up with a moving car. Whilst flying, he could probably keep up with a train. That's sort of how I, in my head, negotiate how fast he is. And at the bottom here, where Loretta calls him out for leaving to get his suit, he is explaining because it's designed for combat, it's like a body armor. Which is true, but also a part of it is he's been wearing that suit for pretty much 5 years straight, and that suit has become as much a part of him as the name Remo. So it's all part of this transitioning identity he has from Matthew Remtoll, the actor, to Remo, the hero. But the catalyst between that was Remo, the slave fighter. It's a lasting thing that his captors have put upon him, that he felt like he needed that suit to go into this fight. And he's playing it off as a joke. Loretta sees through it because she knows him and she knows what he's like. And then we get our little open-ended segment where we see the guy who's made the Intimidator go down into his basement and open up plans for the Mark II model. Yeah, I wasn't sure about how to end this at first, but I like this ending because it's not exactly a cliffhanger. It's more of just an implication that there will be more to come. It's more like the end of Back to the Future than, say, the end of The Desolation of Smaug. One of those is a straight-up cliffhanger. There's definitely more to this story. It hasn't ended yet. Whereas Back to the Future is like an implication of more adventures. That's why I've put this in. Also, again, to show that there is a person behind the Intimidator and that they have plans for more. And because Remo talked about himself on the news, this person who we're looking at from behind now has a specific target, an adversary. And then we come to the end of the comic. So that's first day back on Earth. And there's a little bit of behind the scenes as to what my creative process behind drawing that comic was. Probably future issues won't be as deep into his psyche. It might be a more lighter, fun adventure type thing, but I felt because this is the first issue, I just wanted to get as much established about this character as I possibly could. I feel like I did that pretty well. I'm pretty proud of this whole thing, and so yeah, there's First Day Back on Earth. Originally it was going to be called Man in the Green Cape. I went with First Day Back on Earth because I felt like that as a title gives more immediate information to the audience, because clearly someone's been to space and something has happened. So there it is. Hope you've enjoyed this commentary. I've certainly enjoyed making the comic and talking about it here. And yeah, like I say, I've got more projects that I'm working on. You'll be seeing more of Remo, you'll be seeing some of another character, and if people like this, then I'll probably do more of these. Thank you for watching this, hope you enjoyed it. If you could leave a thumbs up, then I'd appreciate that, and just enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for stopping by. Hopefully I'll see you soon.